Hello, folks, and welcome back once again to Chris Wyatt Reports. This is Colonel Chris Wyatt in Pretoria, or Tshwane, the metropolitan area, and I'm here with the mayor of the metropolitan. That is, now this is where I'm going to get in trouble. I'm going to butcher this. We've been on a panel together in the past in the Western Cape, so my apologies in advance, but when you use two surnames, it's always a challenge for us non-Afrikaans speakers. So, Cilliers Brink. What did I get wrong?
Perfect. No, it's perfect.
That's perfect.
Yes.
Right, well, that's rare. Anyway, well, thank you very much. Listen, you made an appearance today, and you talk about a number of things here, challenges you're facing. First off, I want to ask you this question. Are you crazy? What I mean is, you were doing some really interesting things, and you took on a job that seems really thankless and almost impossible. I mean it tongue-in-cheek. You're not really crazy, but you took on a challenge that most people would walk away from.
Absolutely, but I think it's important that, some Apple slogan that goes, crazy people change the world. Now, I don't want to be a Steve Jobs lookalike. But you do need ambition in politics, and if you're ambitious, you take on difficult projects that are that you feel deep, that you care deeply about. And I care about this place. This is my town. This is where I met my wife. This is where I have my most of my relationships, my friendships. I want this place to succeed, but also politically, the Tshwane Metro has got two of the conditions for a successful coalition. We've got a majority in the council, paper thin, 2. And we've got a cohesive group of parties and people of integrity at the decision-making table. So DA, Action SA, Freedom Front Plus, ACDP, IFP. Those are solid parties. We're not bickering about jobs and tenders. We are really in this together. You're
focused on serving the people of the metro.
And this is a rescue mission because we've made mistakes here before. Very difficult circumstances. Our coalition didn't have a majority in council for much of the past 7 years.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but that's actually an important point because oftentimes in the press and the public, people look at the city and say, wait a second, that coalition's been in charge for years, but you didn't have a majority coalition, so you can't just muscle things through and make decisions like the budget and policy. You have to reach consensus, and with the fractious parties, that's a challenge. But now you have a majority.
We do have a majority, paper thin, but it's an important point. From 2016 to 21, there was no majority, even among the coalition partners. So you had to negotiate almost everything with the ANC or the EFF. Now, how do you fundamentally change an institution that's been captured by the ANC by then negotiating with them? You can't. It's a hostage situation. And so we ended up making a lot of compromises in a sincere attempt to try and hold things together. But you also need to know when to walk away from a government, from a coalition. But we've learned a lot of lessons, and now that we have a majority, we face incredibly difficult circumstances, including finances of the city being in a very, very bad shape.
Very perilous at this stage.
Very perilous. But we've got a cohesive coalition. We know what needs to be done, and we're willing to make the tough calls, like not granting salary increases to employees, which has led to a massive strike, disruption of services.
Very popular.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's at least the folks who understand what is at stake can stand with us and say, we can accept that our bin won't be lifted for 2-3 weeks, although it's very difficult. We don't, it's not the kind of forbearance we ask, but it's important that folks know what is at stake.
Well, this past 2 days in Johannesburg and Kempton Park, actually at Emperor's Palace, very potentially historic event took place. That was the National Convention of 2023. I was there and observed it. Very fascinating. 7 political parties, including yours, the Democratic Alliance, coming together. And actually, this kind of, I believe, came out of the idea that John Steenhuisen and the party came up with for this so-called Moonshot Pact. They've done a pre-election coalition, and they've agreed on a vision, they've agreed on principles, and they've made some clear-cut decisions we're not going to compromise on. If they hold to that, that should be very fascinating for next year. Do you think that's possibly a path forward for South Africa? That's certainly at the national, provincial level we're talking about. You're obviously at the municipal level now, but do you think that's a path forward for South Africa?
Absolutely, and many of the decisions that have now been made as part of the Moonshot Pact or the multi-party
charter for South Africa.
Charter, I still have to get used to that because I didn't attend those meetings.
Use the hashtag Charter24. That's the social media one.
Charter24. Many of the principles that were established there were learned from difficult experiences in the metros, in the coalitions. And you can look at Johannesburg and Ekurhuleni, where we never had a majority, where there were demands for compromises on principle. And we learned from that, And we have to learn from that, because if we get to a point where coalitions have to take over national government and we can't agree on foreign policy, we can't agree on who the leader of government business, who the president is, then what's going to happen? The politicized civil service is going to look at us amused and just keep on implementing ANC policy. And that's the key lesson. If we're not united as a coalition, if we don't have a joint program of action and have some details sketched out, the ANC cadre deployed civil service will simply continue as before.
That would be disastrous to South Africa. It's been tragic consequences. A couple last questions. I'll let you get out of here. Busy guy. You got a strike going on. You've got services to work on. What is your biggest challenge? But before you answer it, I think a lot of people, voters in the metro and around the country and around the world, don't really understand that governance is a little different here than it is in many other places. My metro doesn't supply my electricity. I get that from a private provider, and that's common in the States. But here, the municipalities are the service provider. They have to buy it from ESCOM, and then people have to pay them, and you don't always get paid. So I think people need to understand a little bit better the challenges that governments face. But what would you say is your biggest challenge? Because there's a lot of them.
So finances in the city of Tshwane, South Africa's capital, is the biggest challenge. A big part of the local government funding model in this country was electricity distribution. So you had your monopoly electricity provider, ESCOM, which we know is falling apart,
The parastatal.
And that then supplies municipalities, who distributes to residential and business customers. Now you have load shedding. In other words,
No electricity.
The monopoly supplier can't supply.
So you're not making money when it's not coming.
We're not selling electricity, and the switching on and off of our distribution grid is causing havoc because it was never built for that kind of wear and tear. So a business model that used to fund other services, the sale of electricity, now operates at a loss. And trying to solve that question is fundamental, aside from all of the other basic things like revenue collection, like billing and so forth.
Well, I'd have to say that, I began this with a tongue-in-cheek question asking if you're crazy. I'd have to come to the conclusion here, wrapping it up, that I think you're courageous. It's quite a challenge to take on here. And I want to thank you for your time. It's a pleasure to have a chance to chat with you again. Cilliers Brink, the mayor of Tshwane. Sorry, I got to get it right there.
Great to see you again. Great to chat to you.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Folks, thanks a lot. We'll catch you here next time on Chris Wyatt Reports.